Hi, good morning, everyone. Very good morning to you all. And welcome to the Home of Sustainable Agriculture of the Americas, which is a platform facilitated by EEC and our partners to give voice to the agricultural sector in the hemisphere in these processes under the UNFCCC, and also to build capacity to do this. And not just to present all the advances that we're having, but also to really have a discussion about these challenges and what we need to do when we go back each to our own countries and how we can move forward. We've had a really amazing set of events here over the past 2 weeks, over 50, and I'm very pleased to have this one on our final day as forward-looking. Where can we go collectively from here? And more importantly, for those of us working in the Americas and who truly believe in the potential of this hemisphere to be part of the solution, which was the slogan for our friends at CAF at their pavilion. We are the solution. And I think all of us that really focus on the hemisphere really do believe that, and we need to work together to help the region really capitalize and realize the potential that it has. It's been a long stretch, but as exhausted as I also feel really energized and most of all hopeful that all of us together working to achieve what we need to achieve, even if the negotiations don't advance at the pace that we want. We know that's not surprising given the consensus-based mechanism that we have in 196 countries. But even outside the formal negotiations, that's where things are really happening and moving at such a dynamic pace. There's 3 points I wanted to put on the table. And as a lot of actors, a lot of us that work a lot with the public sector, we have to align the policy to what the science dictates. The science doesn't align to what the policy necessarily wants. The other way around, it really doesn't work. What the science is telling us are these biophysical limits in our planetary system, and they don't change. Those limits are there. If all the current targets in the NDCs were achieved, we'd still get to 2.4 degrees of temperature rise, and it's almost a whole degree over where we really want and need to be. So it's just simply not good enough. We need to up the ambition, and not only up the ambition, but close the implementation gap. And so therefore, we really need to give tools to the actors at different levels so that they can do more. We need capacities, incentives, we need better communication, policy and regulatory framework, strengthened institutions, and of course, finance. From the sector that I work in, farmers are really innovators and rational business people. If they have the enabling conditions, production, which is the base of our food systems, that's going to respond in force. And so it's not just about saying what we need to do, but helping them really understand how we can do that. And third, we really need everybody on board. Everyone has a role, from the policymakers to the advocacy people, people pushing specific solutions and people pushing for more holistic and systemic change. And in our region, given the emissions profile and the role of the agriculture sector in providing livelihoods, in safeguarding our natural resources, in providing food security, agriculture is really key to the solution. Agriculture is this nexus sector that touches on all others. Of course, water and energy and food, which we're focusing on today, but also transport, health, tourism, and so on. And it's in the agriculture sector that EEC has really been focusing its efforts at the technical level, working to build capacity in the negotiators to intervene, informed interventions not only here, but through the national, the process to build positions at the national level. We've also been working on enabling the agriculture sector to understand and contribute to the design and implementation of NDCs, and to work at the political level. The dialogues we've held now with ministers of agriculture from the hemisphere since 2021 on this topic, in particular the consensus messages that the ministers and secretaries of agriculture agreed on climate change last year, among which includes to continue to strengthen the presence of the ministries of agriculture and livestock here and also in the national processes, to advance in the implementation of the NDCs and NAPs, noting the need for stronger enabling environment and finance, and also working to improve access to climate funding for the countries in the region. These are the same messages that are echoed in the resolutions of the OAS General Assembly from June of this year, urging member states to take action to meet their Paris Agreement commitments and to continue working together to enhance the access to availability and effectiveness of climate finance. And so I think that's where sectors can really learn from each other and help guide the investment on behalf of countries need to guide the investment to where it needs to be and make sure it gets there at the right time. I was really pleased to see the first objective of the Inter-American Climate Change Action Plan is strengthening cooperation for the benefit of the region. And it's so fantastic to have, CAF be here with the CAF and the OAS. There's so many elements there that we can really advance. And I do think a lot more conversations are needed. We tend to be so busy that we run by each other, we agree, and then we continue. And I think we need to, step back and really identify these priorities. What are these investments? Hone into the specific needs and how we can each contribute to this broad vision that we really have for the Americas being a solution. And then even to do more, we really need to be doing and learning through that and building together. And so it's really when we leave here that true work begins.
Thank you, Kelly. And really, it is a great pleasure to cooperate with ICA in this regard. It's sometimes I find it ironic that we have to come all the way to Dubai to see each other as partner organizations and as partners in this fight. But it really is a great honor to participate today together with ICA. So on behalf of the Organization of American States, particularly on behalf of my boss, the Secretary General, Luis Almagro of the OAS, I'd like to welcome everyone here today in person and online to this panel, which I think will be really a great opportunity to connect some of the progress and actions that we are pursuing in the hemisphere of the Americas with what is happening here in the global context at the COP. For those of you that may not be fully familiar with the OAS, just real quickly to give you a sense of the Organization of American States as an organization and what we are doing in this world, in this hemisphere, as a regional political organization, first and foremost, committed to supporting the democracies of the hemisphere, human rights, security, and economic development. We're really part of and really an integral member of the Inter-American system. The Inter-American system obviously includes the ICA, but also organizations like PAHO, which addresses our health concerns. It includes CAF and the Inter-American Development Bank that are financial institutions, and many others, all working together to really support these similar objectives throughout the Americas, but particularly focused on Latin America and the Caribbean. Within those principal objectives of the OAS, along the lines of democracy, human rights, et cetera, particularly focused on the economic development pillar, I represent, together with my colleagues and Ruben Contreras, who is here today, I represent the Department of Sustainable Development. So our work is really trying to enable economic development, but along these sustainable lines. Within the program of sustainable development at the OAS, we're really focused on 4 key pillars. Those are energy, water, particularly transboundary water resource management, natural disasters, risk reduction, really building resilience throughout the hemisphere to natural disasters, and finally climate change. Climate change is really a cross-cutting element of our portfolio, and in particular, we're really committed to helping the countries of the Americas access existing sources of climate finance. And we'll be talking about building a climate finance hub so that we can continue to bring countries of the Americas to opportunities for climate finance to pursue those objectives. Real quickly, the way in which we're governed within this framework of the OAS, we have our member states, of which we have 34 active member states, all the independent democratic countries of the Americas. And at the highest level, we're governed by the heads of state. Presidents come together on the Summit of the Americas process. But at the level of economic development, in particular sustainable development, we are led by the ministers of environment throughout the hemisphere. And we've been fortunate over this past year to have a ministerial event that was hosted by the country of the Bahamas under the just tremendous leadership of the Minister for Economic Development and Other Affairs at the Bahamas, Minister Michael Halkitis. Minister Halkitis took us down a pathway of negotiating with the countries of the Americas to develop a declaration and a plan of action. And these are the documents that ultimately will govern our support our interactions throughout the hemisphere as the OAS and as member states. So I want to end my introductory remarks with that and publicly thank Minister Halkitis and his government for the tremendous leadership around the most recent, the fourth Sustainable Development Ministerial of the Americas, and for the issuance of the Nassau Declaration and the Inter-American Climate Change Action Plan. Now it's time to get to work, and I mean that both in terms of this panel, but also it's time to get back to business and really working together as a hemisphere, working with our partners, ICA and others, CAF and all of our other Inter-American system partners, and really go about the business of supporting each other to achieve the objectives, not just of the Climate Change Action Plan, but of the outcomes of this COP, and really optimistic about where this is going. So with that being said, I want to introduce this really tremendous panel that we have offered for you today. As I said, we'll start with a few remarks from the Honorable Michael Halkitis, Minister of Economic Affairs from the Bahamas, who has joined us, and I really appreciate your participation in this event, and also to capture this really critical connection between climate change, development, and agriculture. We're honored to have the Honorable Minister Saboto Schofield, Minister of Agriculture from St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Then I'll have the opportunity to turn to representatives from sectors, and Maribel Pinto, the head of Adaptation Department at the Climate Change Directorate at the Ministry of Environment from Panama. Thank you for being with us. And finally, really excited to have representing our partners at the at CAF, the Green Bank of the Americas, the Development Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean, Alicia Montalvo, who is lead for climate action and positive biodiversity. Thank you, Alicia. So I want to just turn open to Minister Halkitis real briefly, and just to ask you if you can give us some reflections on where we have been over the last, really it's been a year, in the development of the Declaration and Action Plan, and then a little bit of an update on the results from the ministerial, and if you can just make the connection to where we're going as a hemisphere and how that relates to some of these objectives of the COP.
Thank you. Right here? Stay here.
Yes,
Thank you very much, Mark. And it's a pleasure to join you at this call to action event being organized by the OAS and ICA in the margin of COP28 in my capacity as chair of the Inter-American Committee for Sustainable Development. 2 months ago, the sovereign countries of the Americas met in the Bahamas and decided to prioritize and expand the mandate for the OAS and the wider Inter-American system to support climate action across the Americas. What became clear over the course of our dialogue and negotiation over the last year was that all of our countries understood that the work of climate action cannot be limited to only one sphere or one institution. An all-hands-on-deck approach is necessary if we are to counter the existential threat of the climate crisis. The ministerial outcome documents, the Declaration of Nassau for Sustainable Development in the Americas, and the Inter-American Climate Change Action Plan represents consensus hemispheric priorities for climate action and a roadmap for coordinating hemispheric collaboration on addressing greenhouse gas emissions, integrated water management, climate change adaptation, disaster risk management, and making progress towards low-emission, climate-resilient economies. The October ministerial also endorsed the Declaration of the Bahamas on Climate Finance in the Americas, which declared a hemispheric commitment to intensify collaborative efforts to broaden access, affordability, and adequacy of climate finance for the developing countries of the Americas. Coming out of our meetings in Nassau, we have committed to the development of projects and programs aimed at supporting the climate action goals and NDCs of OAS member states, including, for example, through creation of a regional hub on climate finance, which will support member states in identifying and building capacity to to access climate financing, creation of a collaboratory for sharing knowledge and building capacity and data for decision making to build resiliency to disasters, the development of a new climate smart skills training program, which will offer training to build local capacity in key areas such as sustainable agriculture, land use and planning, and data science, and finally, collaboration to strengthen circular economy practices across the hemisphere. In the weeks and months ahead, we look forward to collaborating with countries across the Americas, the institutions of the Inter-American System, such as the OAS, the IDB, PAHO, AICA, CAF, and other climate partners such as the multilateral development banks to animate collective climate action priorities which were memorialized in the Bahamas. And perhaps most importantly, our gathering in the Bahamas demonstrated the unity of purpose across the Americas for addressing the climate crisis and the respective potency of hemispheric advocacy with a collective voice. I believe that we can utilize the declarations of the Bahamas and Nassau, respectively, as the basis of that collective hemispheric voice, and I recommend that we commend those outcomes to our COP climate negotiators, which we have done. Thank you.
Minister, thank you so much for those remarks. I'm going to continue on down with our panelists, but I really will, I'll come back to you maybe to try to connect some of these pieces as we continue the conversation now this afternoon. I'm honored now to turn to Minister Saboto, Minister of Agriculture from St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And maybe, Minister, you can connect us a little bit to some of the both challenges and progress in the agriculture space with regards to what we are experiencing in terms of climate change. And in particular, as a small island developing state, what can you bring to us in terms of how can we work together to address some of those critical challenges?
Thank you very much, and I want to begin by thanking the OAS and AICA for this platform, and I think that we could not create a better theme than the call to action in the Americas. As we speak, there are farmers in La Paz and Cochabamba who in a few hours will be awakened. We also have farmers in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, in my community, and throughout the rest of the Caribbean, and the fisher folk, the conch fishers in Nassau. And the question that we must address coming out of COP as an event is what is the trajectory that we are going to take this platform. And I must note by way of introduction that we must take the discussion from the stratosphere, and it's time for the rubber to actually hit the road. We have significant stakeholders in our farmers and our fishers, and whenever I speak about climate change, I don't only like to speak about farmers, but I want to speak about food producers, because they're farmers, they're fishers, and they're agro-processors. The fact that agriculture is at the table now, we're addressing issues of food security and food sovereignty, in whole and in part. And as we move forward in the call to action, there is a need for a carefully articulated in-country plan. So we are now moving from the discussion in the stratosphere, the global geopolitical call to action that we have in here, to how do we now domesticate all of this to bring meaning to the banana farmers, the okra farmers, the fishers. How do we cross that hurdle? And in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, we have dedicated the year 2024 to climate action. And I'm using this as an early invitation in October 2024, we will be hosting the Caribbean Week of Agriculture, and it will be around climate proofing the agriculture system in St. Vincent and the Grenadines to provide a best model for small island developing states in the Caribbean. It begins with a platform for sensitization, a platform for education, and even a change in the nomenclature of some of the units in the Ministry of Agriculture. I'm very happy to know that my esteemed brother, Minister of Finance, is here because we go to our budget in January. And at the budget call in January, we have already changed the platform for the Ministry of Agriculture, where every step is going to be about how do we climate proof the agriculture sector, the fisheries sector, the food production sectors in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And I'm really happy to be a part of the global call to action, but I'm even happier to be a policymaker, a legislator who will be working to domesticate a lot of what we are doing. And I'm really happy to work with the OAS and AICA and all other institutions to make this happen.
I really appreciate those remarks. I want to just follow up real quickly. Sorry, we'll continue. Let's do that. I want to come back kind of with a clarification and comment, but just to connect the Sustainable Development Ministerial that Minister Halkitis mentioned and its declaration, and just to quote real briefly from the output, which starts with the declaration which declares that the Paris Agreement, et cetera, strives to increase the ability to adapt to the adverse impacts of climate change and foster climate resilience and low greenhouse gas emissions developed in a manner that does not threaten food production. This was really I mean, I don't know about you, Minister, but we heard from our member states, the delegates in the room, as we were negotiating the Declaration and Action Plan over and over. Please do not forget about agriculture, food security, food poverty. So, Minister Sabota, I really appreciate hearing that from you. And I wonder, from your perspective of the agricultural, and I'll come back to you, Minister Halkitis, from the money side, but what building resilience, adapting to the inevitable impacts, what are the action items? You talk about putting, rubber to the road. Are we talking about more money? Are we talking about knowledge? Are we talking about skills building? What are some of the actions that this collective body in the Inter-American system can take to help you and other small island states, and as you mentioned, our brothers and sisters in Bolivia, for example, similarly, how do we build a more resilient agriculture and food system in the face of climate change?
So the first step is that there is a need to build an exceptional cadre of multi-talented and multifaceted technicians, because within our countries, most of our technicians were trained in a culture, and they were also trained at universities when we did not have so many vagaries of climate change. So first of all, we have to understand and we have to appreciate that the dispensation that we are living in, that there are some experts in the world that we have to bring in. So that's the first step. The second step is we have to cross the hurdle of getting into the ears and to the hearts of the farmers, because there is significant disbelief, there is significant absence of the transfer of information still. There's still many farmers who, they go planting on a yearly basis. They were doing it the same way in the same place, in the same agri-ecological zone that their grandparents did, but they're not getting the same results. And they're asking themselves, well, why? Why is it happening? We're hearing about climate change, but there is a need to bridge that gap between the technicians and the farmers. Once we have that buy-in, then we can speak about allocating the resources, ensuring that the divers who dive for conch understand why they now have to dive deeper for conch. For the vegetable farmers to appreciate why they have to look for different varieties of seeds instead of going with those that they planted historically. So I think once we get the technical side going, we can now work with the farmers and we can have that actual implementation. Well, I'm really, really ready to see us get into the communities. Let us get into the different networks, the producer groups, the cooperatives, and let there be a bottom up approach. Because right now, we have to be frank, it is a top down approach.
Thank you very much. And I want to turn quickly to Minister Halkides. And as Minister representing Finance, where, how does Bahamas address this challenge from a money perspective? Is there enough money? Is this a question of international climate finance? And how can money help catalyze some of the skills development, capacity building that is so critical in the region?
I think when we, there's never enough money to share around. I think what makes the sector more attractive, I would say, is coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic and the interruption of the supply chains. You had many more people, and I'm sure this has probably happened around the region, becoming, concerned about some nations putting restrictions on the export of certain commodities, the interruption of shipping. We import most of our food mostly from the United States. When that's interrupted, the impact in terms of inflation. And so I think what has happened is people are now more receptive to agriculture as a sector. We started something that we call the Bahamas Agricultural and Marine Science Institute in the Bahamas. The objective was to teach people, mostly young people, as my brother said, about the scientific method, modern methods of agriculture, so that you move away from the traditional slash and burn that our grandparents and our great grandparents use, and move into more modern methods. I think the money will come because there's now more of a, whereas in the past agriculture might have been an afterthought because you import your food cheaply from the US or from Canada. Now it becomes a necessity. People's minds are open, and so even private sector money is more open to being invested in the agricultural sector.
Thank you for that answer, and thank you for driving this agenda through the ministerial process. Now I want to take us to a Central America, move us out of the Caribbean for a moment. Well, connected to the Caribbean, but Central American country of Panama, and introduce Maribel Pinto. She's head of the adaptation department at the climate change directorate at the Ministry of Environment from Panama. And I'll ask you a question, Maribel, and I understand, Maribel, you might respond in Spanish, and I will help with some translation sort of on the fly. So we'll address this way. But let me start by asking you, in the context of addressing climate change in this hemisphere, how can governments and organizations really work together effectively to pursue a regional approach? And by that, I would include those of us in the room, OAS, ICA, CAF, IDB, and others. How do we collaborate together with you as country and countries to address these critical issues of climate change?
Well, thank you so much for the invitation for Panama for me here. Like as you say, I'm going to speak in Spanish. So, bueno, para Panamá tenemos la experiencia y creo que nos ha dado frutos de trabajar en conjuntamente con todas las partes en el país, sector privado, academia, diferentes instituciones, para tener todos sus puntos de vista.
So, as Panama, we've had good experience working across internal sectors, private, academic, and others, as we pursue these challenges.
Y un punto muy importante, y como lo mencionaban los ministros, es que las personas muchas veces no entienden qué es el cambio climático. Consideran que no es algo que no le afecta a ellos. y al involucrarlos, si se dan de cuenta que se ven afectados económicamente y socialmente.
So it's interesting, and as mentioned by both ministers, many of our population don't actually feel that what they're experiencing is necessarily climate change. And so building awareness that they are all connected to climate change, whether that's economically, socially, and other.
Entonces, los trabajos o conexiones que podamos hacer con las diferentes instituciones regionalmente de los otros países permite crear puentes para aprender de las experiencias, mejorar lo que ya estamos haciendo, involucrarlo y sobre todo trabajar con las comunidades.
So with the connections throughout the hemisphere and with other organizations, we can use these to help share the knowledge, share capacity, and really work together.
Y cuando nos referimos a la parte de las comunidades o las organizaciones civiles, es involucrarlos en la formulación, que ellos se sientan parte de la ejecución del proyecto, de manera que en el futuro, cuando el proyecto termine, ellos tengan la capacidad de continuar generando información y ser más resilientes.
Really focus on communities, and when we work at community levels, when we have programs, projects with the communities, when the project ends, we are then left with a more capable, better capacity within those local communities.
Al crear capacidades también a ellos, se les da la oportunidad de que ellos directamente trabajen con los actores de los otros países o las agencias como la OEA, ICA, independientemente. Tenemos más personas trabajando, hablando de cambio climático y también creando nuevos productos mucho más funcionales y asegurando lo que es la seguridad alimenticia.
So it's important to actually build within the communities the ability that these local communities have their own capacity to work with some of the international organizations, ECA, OAS, and others, so that we have a wider community talking to each other and moving forward.
Gracias.
Thank you. Let me turn quickly to Alicia. I'm going to introduce Alicia Moltavo again. And Alicia, let me start with same kind of question, is if you can talk to us a little bit about how our organizations, in this case CAF, how can we work more closely, better together to address some of the challenges at the intersection of climate and agriculture, or broadly across the climate hemisphere. And I will say, I'll come back to both of you with some follow-up questions, but I wanted to get your reaction also, Alicia, to some of these challenges.
Thank you very much, and I really appreciate that OAS and ICA has invited CAF to participate in this event. We have good alliances with you, both with ECA. You are helping us to prepare a roadmap on agriculture, and we are working with OAS a lot too. And the first thing I would say is the relevance for us to really put green finance at the core of our business. We are a bank, and we are not only considering climate change, but we are working together climate change of both mitigation and adaptation and biodiversity. So that's why it's very important for us to work in alliances. We were supporting the meeting in Bahamas. We were there, our manager was there, and we were very supportive in the preparation of the declaration. So I think it's really important that we work in how to get finance to the region. Also, I couldn't go to Bahamas. I was there before, right? But I think that the meeting was really relevant, and our manager, Stacy Richards Kennedy, was there, and we were very active on that. Also, we are very active in working in other regions, particularly with the European Union. That's why we also supported St. Vincent when you have the presidency of the CELAC. And for us was very important, the meeting that we had in Europe, first in Brussels and then in Spain. We think it's important that we work in these alliances. In our agenda, we now have a priority which is 40% of our finances will be devoted to green finance. That means around 25 billion up to 26. Yes, and now here, and I think this is important, we have made a commitment, particularly for adaptation and resilience and risk management, which is very important for the agricultural sector, for the Caribbean region specifically. which is 15 billion to be devoted to these kind of projects up to 2030. I think this is, for us, it's a very impressive figure, and we want, of course, to work with the countries to identify the priorities. We are following all the recommendations that in Bridgestone we received. We consider that we need to work very much with the agricultural sector, with the countries to define the kind of projects we need to work with. So what we are doing now is to first to really identify what are the key elements for having a productive and sustainable agricultural sector. We are working with the Green Climate Fund specifically. We are working with the Adaptation Fund. And we are working with all our countries to identify projects in this field. But we consider that this will be one of the main sectors where we will put our investment in the coming years. Because this is one, of course, of the most vulnerable sector for climate change, but also in the region, this is a very important sector for reducing emissions because of the deforestation. It is not probably, of course, in St. Vincent's, but in other countries. What we consider is relevant is that we, as a bank, we are able to talk with the ministers of finance. You are the ones really having the responsibility to prioritize this kind of projects in the agenda we have together. But we can devote technical cooperation, grants for technical cooperation. We can devote resources, grants for preparation of projects, which we consider are very important in many countries. Because one of the problems sometimes is well, we can't find good projects that can be financed. We consider that it's important to have bankable projects that could receive finance not only from CAP but also from green funds. So this is part of our responsibility now. In short, we are devoting $15 billion in adaptation, and we consider that agriculture will be one of the main sectors, and of course also everything related with water and with biodiversity are very close related to agriculture, but we'll listen very carefully what you said, and we think that we need to work also with small farmers, which is very important.
Alicia, I really appreciate that, and I also wanted to thank CAF for some of the cooperation that we have experienced together as organizations. You will recall, you will note that CAF and the OAS work together in several large water projects, transboundary water resource management projects, and you mentioned water and biodiversity, so the interconnection between sectors as they all affect agriculture is so important. So access to water for irrigation, for example, and we work together on a number of those, and I want to thank you for that. You mentioned that you have financial resources, obviously bulk money to invest in grants and loans for projects, but also in the technical capacity space. So I wanted to come back to you and ask, we hear a lot here about climate finance at the COP, and lots of countries clamoring for more and more money. But we also hear sometimes from banks that there's just a lot of money out there, but yet there's this disconnect. What are we missing? Why is it so hard for countries to connect the right resources to the right challenges?
Sometimes we think that it's important to work in enabling conditions to really make possible that the money goes to the right projects and the right partners. That's why we are working very much in reinforcing the regulatory frameworks, in supporting, in reinforcing the institutions too. We think we need to create the conditions for these resources arrive to the right place in productive projects. We see that there is a need for capacity building, specifically in the agricultural sector, because in Latin American and the Caribbean region, most of these, the producers are very small producers. So we think that it's important that we are able to really convey the message that agriculture needs to be consistent with environment. And particularly now we have seen a lot of in trade, in the international trade, we have seen the relevance of the regulations in the European Union regarding the deforestation. I think this is also very relevant for the agricultural sector. We need to really make sure that our producers in Latin America not only have a productive sector, respects the environment, but also we are able to prove that. We are able to make sure that these products go to Europe or to the United States with the traceability which is needed to really make possible that these products go to these markets, not only for food security in the region, which is the first priority, but for food security in the world. So we consider that enabling conditions such as institutional frameworks, regulatory frameworks, even for the financial institutions, because as the producers are very small, they work with banks, local banks. So we need also to create the instruments that for local banks to provide loans to these small farmers. So capacity building, enabling conditions, all of this is needed before we consider that the money has to go there. But both things have to be done at the same time.
Excellent. Thank you for that. I'm going to come back to Ms. Pinto, and I'm going to ask a question, and maybe I'll go down the line next to ministers with a similar question. The topic is around COP30. So thinking ahead 2 years from now, and it's kind of hard to think that far out because we're all pretty exhausted from 2 weeks here in Dubai, but COP comes back to the Americas in Brazil, and many of us hope that this is really a hallmark, really a monumental COP, you know, thinking back from the Brazil or Rio Declaration and now COP 30. Wow, 30 years later, I mean, you can see I've aged a little bit from my picture on the screen and had a little bit more hair in those days. But as we move on, you know, thinking about COP 30 and some of the challenges that you've heard in this room today about climate finance, connecting some of the sectoral priorities, skills development. Maribel, you mentioned developing skills and capacity at a community level. What might your early aspirations be? Where do we go with this as we think ahead to COP30, and what should we be doing together as a community to help each other make major strides at Rio, or at Brazil, in Belém?
Bueno, uno de los puntos, y bueno, en Panamá viene trabajando fuertemente en la alineación de los flujos financieros y crear una taxonomía de proyectos verdes. Tenemos que identificar proyectos que estén alineados con la crisis climática, que tomen en cuenta los análisis de vulnerabilidad y los escenarios de cambio climático.
Yeah, so it's important for Panama to really develop a taxonomy of projects and line up projects that connect into this pipeline looking ahead to Brazil.
Panamá viene trabajando con el Ministerio de Economía y Finanzas muy de cerca, haciendo la capacitación sobre cuáles son los riesgos y cuáles son los riesgos financieros que se corren si no se hace una planificación basada en los escenarios de cambio climático.
So, in Panama, working closely with the Ministry of Finance, thinking about where are those gaps and where are the biggest risks in terms of climate finance or finance needs.
Por lo que nosotros es como lo que se aspira realmente para la región. No es solamente los riesgos que estén en Panamá, sino que toda la región tiene diferentes vulnerabilidades y riesgos que al momento de compartirlo es la parte de fortalecimiento de capacidades y el involucramiento de las partes.
Really, the challenges are similar, not just in Panama, but across the region. I missed your second half. And how do we work together?
I also forget the another part. Por lo que no deberíamos trabajar sin relacionar los escenarios, los análisis de vulnerabilidad. Los proyectos, infraestructura, agricultura, biodiversidad, mucho de lo que se ha mencionado, tienen que tener la base científica para poder hacer proyectos reales.
We really can't achieve our objectives if we don't do good assessment of the vulnerability to, our ability and need to adapt going forward.
Em, Ese sería como parte de lo que, y viendo todo lo que ha pasado aquí ahora mismito en la COP, cómo los temas se han movido lento. ¿Cuáles serían las aspiraciones de aquí al 2000, a la próxima COP y al finalmente a la COP30, llevar esa meta regional, que la aspiración que en 2 años logremos compartir las experiencias y alinear todas las instituciones?
We really need to get an understanding of how, as a region, we can address these challenges and bring these together collectively to COP30.
Yeah.
Thank you. So, Minister Halkitis, as you ponder Bahamas' priorities 2 years ahead,
Yeah.
what are some of the things, maybe even connected to what we just did, the Climate Action Plan, but what would you hope we can bring together as a hemisphere to COP30?
I hope we can really open the gates for more finance to flow. What in the Bahamas, we're in the hurricane zone. We're a nation of islands, and so if we're hit by an incident, we have to, reconstruct infrastructure in 20 islands. And over time, that adds to your debt. You have less headroom to do other things, and then because your debt is higher, you're perceived as a higher risk, and because you are, subject to these climate events, you're also perceived as a higher risk. The interest rate goes up, and so the cost of your debt is high. And so, how can we access some financing that maybe we can refinance, and other countries in the region refinance some of this high cost debt that'll give us the headroom to respond to events and as well, to invest in other areas of the economy. So let's really unlock this climate finance.
Yeah, it's important that you note just the sort of spiral effect
Yeah.
of the vulnerability, in particular, that small island states face with a disaster. It then requires it not only takes out infrastructure, but you have to rebuild the debt that's associated with that, and standard debt adds on top of it, and it really becomes difficult to come out of those situations. So freeing up grants and low-cost finance is a critical priority. I wonder, in the case of St. Vincent and the Grenadine, and maybe in particular in the sector of agriculture, do you have particular wishes, desires in terms of where we go with COP, and maybe any reflections on decisions coming out of here with regards to adaptation in agriculture?
Well, firstly, I must say the fact that you posited early in the shaping of your question that it's going to be 30 years, and it's a virtual indictment that it took almost 30 years to bring agriculture as a mainstream item on a side agenda, firstly.
Totally.
So, from the standpoint of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, based on our appreciation of what has taken place here at COP28, over the next 2 years, we anticipate that we are going to be able to show results. Because at some point in time, we can't always be reflective in speaking about the present, but we have to be speaking about where do we want to be and what are some of the results that we would want to have. We anticipate that we will be able to have a full sensitization of the farming population and fishers, food producers in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, but not only in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, because we operate as a collective within the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States and also in CARICOM. In CARICOM, we have a mantra that we want to reduce our food import bill by 25% by 2025. So I'm not only speaking about what we intend to do locally at the national level, but at the sub-regional and the regional level. And of course, we would wish that CELAC, I know that Honduras is going to be implementing the Food and Nutrition Security Plan. starting from February of 2024, that will play a critical role in having a climate proof and a secured system for production and productivity.
Thanks for those remarks, Minister, and certainly, I think, everyone always knows, we all know the importance of the connection between climate and agriculture, but you're absolutely right. Just putting it at the front of the agenda, the most critical survival element and its relationship to climate is so important. And so I'm glad you note that, and I just hope we keep making strides moving ahead. Alicia, from the perspective of CAF as a financial institution, and at the beginning, I really appreciate sort of the subtext of CAF, which is also calling itself the Green Bank of the Americas, and just acknowledging what your organization has done and its commitment to supporting countries of the hemisphere. And you've evolved significantly since I knew it originally as the Corporación Andino de Fomento, and it's really amazing. And we appreciate this partnership. As you think ahead to the next few years as a financial institution, can you express any of sort of the commitments that CAF would have to helping address some of these problems? I know it's demand driven, but how do we make some of these solutions a reality?
Well, as I mentioned, we have this commitment for 2026 that 40% of our portfolio will be devoted to green projects. And we are one of the institutions that are nowadays devoting more resources to adaptation. Almost 40% of our financing now goes to in green, say, goes to adaptation. We are the most relevant financial institution, multilateral development institution in Latin America, working in adaptation. And agriculture is one of the most important sectors there. So we see this sector as one of the most relevant for us. Actually, we are increasing our portfolio in agriculture, especially, as I mentioned, working with the green funds. We consider that this sector deserves much more attention. You have mentioned that the 30 years is a long way. I also was in the first COP, so I can ensure that. But perhaps not so many changes in the decisions. This is important. But when you read the other, you think, my God, I think they use the same conclusions.
Words,
Yes. So, but I think this is, we see small movements, but very crucial movements, and agriculture is one of them. Blue economy is another one. The ocean, fisheries. I think that we see these small movements are very relevant, and we as a bank that was not a green bank before.
Yeah.
We made this commitment last year. It's not so easy sometimes to identify the projects, to work with institutions. As you have said, we are demand driven, but we need to be able to create this demand with tools, because otherwise these issues probably will not be in the agenda. I understand that sometimes there are other issues, mainly infrastructures or other questions, but agriculture is one of the most relevant because of the number of people living out of this, and because the impacts of climate change in agriculture are really very high. So we see that this sector will increase in our portfolio, and also related with water, which is really crucial. But not only irrigation projects, but also resilient territories, also the idea of smart agriculture, which is very important nowadays, and including ancestral practices with technology and make good projects. So we see that this will increase in the agenda, and this is very relevant for us to see this in the COP28, in the way to COP30, which should be a COP where the line between climate change and biodiversity should be erased.
Absolutely.
From my opinion.
Nature really at its heart. And I also appreciate the way you connect to the broader, say, water agenda. Maribel, Panama is experiencing a crisis that is really affecting the world with drought and access to the Panama Canal, which connects so closely to our topic today, agriculture, and as small island developing states, demanding a lot of imported food and fuel, and so access to the canal is a challenge. So maybe not as a question, but just in my head, I'm thinking about all these the interconnectedness of all these problems, and Panama having you here is really critical because we're really at crisis in terms of global transshipping, the people of Panama suffering the same drought in terms of its food and agriculture, and it really is an important challenge at this time.
Sí, no solamente el canal, en efecto, la autoridad del canal de Panamá está preparando el calado de los buques para poder pasar, se demora más tiempo, entonces hay un impacto grave y económicamente hablando a nivel mundial, no solamente ya de la región.
Yeah, it's not just the local environment of the canal, but the economic of the business of the world as there's delays in transshipment and people can't get access to goods that need to flow through the canal.
Atrasa completamente la mercancía a nivel mundial. Y lo que también ellos incluso tienen un plan de ordenamiento territorial, están pensando a futuro donde también pueden obtener más embalses para el agua del canal.
Yeah, so it really affects the economy of the world, and there's planning right now about thinking how can we have better storage of water to avoid similar problems going forward.
Y regresando un poco a la investigación científica, los escenarios de cambio climático, Panamá acaba de tener su actualización de escenarios y la región más productiva del país, que era seco, probablemente los escenarios nos muestran que va a haber más lluvia.
Yeah, so in areas that have been productive and dry, others are going to have more rain coming forward.
Y las que eran más lluvia ahora van a ser más secas, por lo que el tipo de producción que va a haber ahí tiene que cambiar completamente.
And those places that have been wet are going to be dry, and so it really requires that we adapt to the changing conditions.
Entonces, la alimentación completa del país se puede ver afectada si no tomamos una planificación y volvemos al punto de fortalecimiento de capacidades. Tenemos que trabajar con los productores de alimentos, como decía el ministro, para cambiar eso y que no todos nos veamos afectados realmente.
Yeah, so if we think about all the full agricultural system in Panama and in other countries is going to change, and we need to build capacity to allow for that adaptation. And we need to work closely, as the minister suggested, with our private sector to facilitate both the planning and change.
Eso.
Thank you. We only have a couple minutes left. I did want to open the door, the opportunity, if anyone has any questions for our esteemed colleagues. In the back here.
You, Minister Saboto, you commented about the indictment about it taking so long for agriculture to be on the table. It was on the table here. We had a food day. We had a food declaration. There were things happening, but yet at the end of the day, food and agriculture weren't mentioned in the final declaration. I don't know if you or Alicia, who's been to 30 COPs, wow, that's... Well, welcome back.
Yeah.
Or the minister from Panama, what is your perspective on there's progress, a couple steps forward, maybe a step back, or maybe not a final step? Any thoughts on that?
Yes, you may not be in the text, but definitely our voices were heard. And I think that what that brings to bear on the conversation is that it posits for the first time a very deep-seated and entrenched perspective that the next COP we need to do more sooner so that we will be able to have ourselves and our work inscribed in the text. But I don't want for this to be daunting at all. The hard work and dedication done by everyone to ensure that we continue to speak about food security and food sovereignty. As we are all aware, if current food production trends continue, by the year 2050, we will have a global food shortage. That's the reality. And that is if the vagaries of climate change are at the same level that they are now. It may get worse. So I intend, from the standpoint of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the standpoint of the Caribbean, that we are going to work with the stakeholders, with other policymakers, to engender that hope that is necessary at the global level.
Thank you for that. Anyone else want to respond? I know there's at least one more question. We'll go down that path. Please, sir.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a few comments in terms of the disparaging, assumption that it took 30 years. I've been involved for more than 30 years. I can tell you that we've been making progress, so that's not the issue. The issue has to do with how does a development bank that decides to go green tailor its funding under the general rubric of the NDCs, the nationally determined contributions, because the nationally determined contributions have flavored the types of projects that have been approved under the GCF. So I'm wondering if you have at least considered how we are going to channel these funds. What is your pipeline going to be parallel to the pipeline from the national designated authorities in the individual countries, or are you going to set up something parallel?
Well, I think I took your question. I mean, we work with the Green Climate Fund, but we always work with the countries. The countries request us to be an implementing agency for them, and we make like we work to help the country to prepare the project for the application with the Green Climate Fund. We work together. What we try is always to mobilize financing from the green funds, but also to use our own resources to really make a very big package. It's not that we have one agenda with the green funds and then one different agenda differently. Is that we try always to use our resources to mobilize the green funds resources and to make them be higher. So, but there are many different instruments. As you know, there are grants from the Adaptation Fund, the GEF. So we work together with the countries to identify what solution fits better in the needs at any particular moment. So in agriculture, we are now working in different projects with the Green Climate Fund, but also the Adaptation Fund would be very useful to really be applied for Adaptation Fund. I don't know if Ignacio, he works also with us in CAF, and he's working directly with the Green Funds, can support you in any particular question. We'll be very glad to do so.
Okay, maybe I should carry that conversation.
Yes, perfect. No, of course.
Because
thank you.
I've been involved with enhanced direct access to the Green Climate Fund, to the use of the readiness grants, etc. And I want to commend Bahamas, and I think Ms. Wistowski mentioned it, that very first ECA project was led by the NDA from the Bahamas. So I want to commend you publicly on that, because I was part of that as well. But I always get a little worried when I hear that there's going to be enhanced funding if we're going to go through the same channels. I suspect that we're going to have to find a more interdisciplinary, intersectoral routes, because as it stands now, the national designated authority tends to be in a particular ministry. And it is through those ministries that the funding gets put into a pipeline, into a project pipeline. And my experience in the Caribbean has been that agriculture is not as represented as it ought to be. So that was just my little plug here for agriculture. Thank you.
That's most appreciated. I did want to, maybe this will be the last issue, and I'm going to come back to you, Minister Alquitas, real quickly. Sir, on your challenge, it's interesting to note that within the framework of the OAS and the Ministerial on Sustainable Development, we were guided by the Bahamas, which suggested we really need to carve off this challenge of climate finance as an independent topic, and they organized in parallel with the ministerial, a ministerial for climate finance, where some of these same topics came up. You may want to just make a few remarks on some of the outcomes of the climate finance conversation in the Americas.
Yeah, I think has been brought up here, there's always the assertion that there's funding out there. How do you get it? and also coming out of our ministerial was the commitment to work together. We spoke about collaborating and building the capacity to enable countries to be able to access the funds, sharing information, the expertise, and the application. So when you speak about, funding available, but are we using the same method to get it? I think coming out of the meeting was, okay, there is a need to build capacity, a center of excellence perhaps within the region where, countries can have access to the expertise to be able to access this financing.
And I would think even, Alicia, if we had a conversation about access to climate finance in the Americas, I think we'd all agree, and we've heard this week talking to you and your colleagues, to Ignacio, to GCF, to GEF, to all the banking institutions, everyone acknowledges that the modalities are difficult, they're flawed. Things were designed in a particular way because of, we have fiduciary responsibilities, there's governance rules, they're built within these big bureaucracies, and so the paperwork is onerous. And I think we're all starting to figure out how do we break down some of these barriers. And this idea coming out of the Bahamas was that we build a sort of a hub of climate finance knowledge building where we can help facilitate access to where even are the funds? Who should we be talking to? Are these private funds? Are they public funds? Are they grants? Are they loans? And then what does the application process look like? Do we start with a concept note? Who are the points of contact? How do I talk to Ignacio? How do I talk to Alicia? Et cetera. So this is something we're going to be working on. We're open, we're as a community want to talk to each other and figure out what it needs to look like so that some of these challenges at least are lessened. We know it's always going to be difficult, but if anyone who has taken out a mortgage from the bank, it's never easy when it comes to money. So it's going to be a challenge, but we at least want to smooth the pathway a bit because there is money out there. We need more, but we also need to make it more accessible. I think we're going to end with that note. I think we're at our time limit here, and I know there's another event coming up in this room shortly. So I just wanted to ask that everybody gives a round of applause for this really great panel. And just wish everybody a great end of COP and safe travels if you're returning somewhere, and best wishes. Cheers.